Let's set the scene. Pitch black darkness, a desolate, lonely bend on the Thane Bhivandi highway, and a kind of terror that literally freezes your blood. Today in this explainer, we're not just rehashing a standard ghost story. No, we are diving deep into the actual anatomy of a horrifying paranormal event. We're looking at Highway 315, The Haunting.
I want to go home. I mean, just imagine you're a cab driver for a second. It's 12:40 a.m., the road is completely empty, and out of nowhere, a woman in a white sari gets into the back of your car. She doesn't lift her head. Instead, in this dry, totally bone-chilling voice, she whispers exactly that. This one single terrifying request is what kicked off the absolute worst night of a driver named Vivek's life.
So what was the outcome of that ride? Well, fast forward to exactly 3:15 a.m. An abandoned car is found sitting on the highway. The driver's door is wide open, the seats are literally soaked in blood, and there are violent drag marks leading straight off the road and into the pitch-black jungle. It looked exactly as if someone, or, something, had dragged him away alive. This wasn't some trick of the light or a creepy shadow. We're talking about a severe, physical, flesh-tearing threat. Moving into part 1, the terror of Highway 315, terrifying nights and 2 victims. Okay, let's dive into how this whole nightmare actually started. So when Vivek was driving, everything seemed perfectly normal at first. But literally the second that woman sat in the back, the temperature inside the car plummeted. I mean, it was freezing, even though the heater was off and the windows were completely rolled up. Then, this overwhelming, sickening stench of wet, rotting earth and decaying flesh just crawled into Vivek's lungs. His panic is naturally peaking at this point, right? So he finally gathers the courage to glance in his rearview mirror. And what does he see? Half of his passenger's face is brutally crushed. We're talking torn flesh, exposed bones, and her mouth is ripped open all the way to her ears, just dripping with blood. She lets out this demonic laugh and shrieks, "You left me to die! Now I won't spare you!" Absolute terror takes over, and Vivek ends up crashing his car straight into the jungle. Now, what's truly fascinating here is looking at the actual mechanics of this supernatural entity. We have this really stark contrast. See, Vivek faced the spirit completely unprotected and met absolute physical terror, which led to his crash. But then, enter a man named Satish. Satish is a tantric, and he encountered this exact same spirit. The game changer? His car was shielded by protective mantras. The very moment the spirit tried to open his door, it was like she hit a high-voltage wire. She took a massive shock, her hands instantly began to burn and smoke, and she fled back into the jungle screaming. So obviously this raises a massive question. What was the actual, absolute truth behind this agonizing spirit? Because clearly this wasn't just some random demonic shadow out there killing people for sport. There was a deep, unresolved mystery at play here. And this is exactly where our whole narrative shifts from your standard survival horror into a really structured, chilling, paranormal investigation. Which brings us to part 2, the investigation. Police and tantrics seek the truth. So Satish immediately goes to the police station. He tells his friend, Inspector Deshmukh, that this was definitely no ordinary accident. Cut to the pitch-black night of Amavasya, a new moon. Satish, the inspector, and his guru, Pandit Gajanan, arrive right at that cursed highway bend. The moment they step out, that freezing temperature drop happens again. Pandit Gajanan simply picks up a handful of soil from the road, smells it, and his eyes just snap open. He immediately realizes the horrifying truth. He tells them, here, someone's pain was left completely unfinished. It turns out, this haunting wasn't just fueled by pure malice. It was powered by this unbearable, lingering trauma that was permanently trapped in the soil of that very spot. Let's uncover what that trauma was in part 3, the tragic reveal, the truth of the painful past. Honestly, this is the part of the explainer that will probably shake you to your core, because we're stepping away from ghost lore and into the horrifying reality of our own world. Let's look at the timeline and trace the agonizing events that created this entity. A few years ago, at exactly 11:30 p.m. in the pouring rain, a speeding truck collided with a bike. Just 1 minute later, at 11:31 p.m., the rider, Manish Thakur, died instantly on impact. But his wife, Sandhya, she actually survived. By 11:45 p.m., Sandhya is lying there with shattered bones, bleeding heavily, and begging every single passing car for help. Fast forward to 12:30 a.m. Multiple cars have slowed down, looked right at her in this desperate state, and then they just drove away. Finally, at 2 a.m.,
After lying there in agony, completely alone and helpless for hours, Sandhya bled to death.
And that brings us to the absolute cruelest truth of this entire case: bystander apathy. This is what happens when people ignore a dying victim in an emergency, usually driven by this selfish fear of getting wrapped up in police or legal trouble. You see, the real villain of this story wasn't a ghost at all. It was the horrific apathy of society. That's what twisted a helpless, dying woman into a vengeful spirit.
So how do you fix something like that? Let's look at part 4, the resolution, peace and liberation of the soul.
Pandit Gajanan understood that this spirit was locked in a vicious cycle of revenge, and the only way she'd find liberation was if her pain was finally acknowledged and resolved. But breaking a curse like this, it required a highly complex, incredibly powerful ritual. First off, they had to gather the actual blood-soaked soil from the crash site, along with a piece of old cloth. Next, they drew a protective circle using ash and vermilion just to shield themselves. Then, they lit the ritual fire using mustard oil to invoke spiritual energy. And finally, the absolute most crucial step of this whole paranormal exorcism, offering the ashes of her deceased husband, Manish, straight into the flames.
I mean, you can imagine, the moment this ritual began, the atmosphere turned absolutely terrifying. All the streetlights on the road just suddenly went out. Then, this horrifying sound of hundreds of people crying echoed loudly from the dark jungle. And then, she manifested. With her body half crushed, she crawled forward, and you could literally hear her bones cracking, audibly with every single movement. She violently confronted the Pandit and the inspector, screaming at the top of her lungs, "They let me die. I suffered, and nobody stopped." She wasn't just haunting the road, she was demanding justice.
But right then, Pandit Gajanan threw his enchanted beads toward her and made his final offering to the fire. And when he did that, her terrifying facade just broke. The true, raw pain behind that horrifying face finally bled through. She whispered, "I didn't want to die. I just wanted to be saved." All that anger, all that terror, it was really just the result of the sheer, utter helplessness and vulnerability she felt in those agonizing final moments of her life.
So Pandit Gajanan stepped forward, placed a portion of the ashes gently on her head, and closed her eyes. Suddenly, this faint figure emerged from the darkness. It was the spirit of her husband, Manish. He walked right over and held her hand. And for the very first time, Sandhya's face showed no fear, no anger, just peace. With one final breath, both spirits dissolved into smoke and vanished into the night. That reunion had finally brought them the liberation they were so desperately seeking. Now, after that night, there was never another accident on Highway 315. But if you talk to the locals, they'll tell you that even today, on the dark, moonless nights of Amavasya, you can still see a man and a woman walking together around that bend. They're forever a reminder of society's fatal mistake. And honestly, it leaves us with one final, haunting question to wrap up this explainer. The next time you see someone injured on the road, will you stop? Or will you be the reason a new Sandhya is born? Definitely something to keep in mind the next time you're behind the wheel.